Hello everyone and welcome to GLB Productions. In this video we're going to look at how to connect two analog mixing consoles together. This is a video that has been requested multiple times over the last 1 year and I'm very happy to be able to bring it to you. So to begin with, let's discuss why we would want to do this. When would you want to connect two mixing consoles together? I can think of at least two situations. The first is when you run out of channels on your main mixer. I'm sure that's happened to all of us. You think you're nicely set up and then the drummer appears with another 3 rack toms, or you get an unexpected string quartet or mariachi band appear. You're full on your main mixer, so what do? Reject the job? No. You connect another one to give you the channels that you need. Now this process is called sub-mixing because the main mixer is the mixer that is connected directly to the back end of the PA system. In other words, your system processor, EQ, amplifiers, or powered speakers. Any mixers that are connected to the main mixer are known as sub-mixers. Now the second situation that I can think of in which you'd need to connect two mixers together is when you're sending audio from one location to another. For example, you need to send a copy of the mix from the main church sanctuary to a cry room or to an overflow room. You're doing a corporate job and you have to send audio between two different conference rooms in the same building. In this case, you'd almost always be connecting two mixers together. Now, anytime you intend to connect two mixers together, you need to work out 3 things. The first is, will you use a balanced connection using XLR or TRS cables, or an unbalanced connection using normal guitar cables? If you're not sure about balanced versus unbalanced connections, please have a look at my DI Boxes Part 1 video. The second thing that you need to work out is, will it be a line level connection, meaning a signal strength of about 1 volt, or will it be a microphone level connection, a signal strength of about 0.01 to 0.1 volts. And finally, will it be a mono connection, in other words only one signal, or will it be a stereo connection? Stereo connection by definition uses 2 signals, a left and a right. So I'm going to begin by giving you some general answers to these questions before we start working with the gear itself. When it comes to balanced versus unbalanced connections, a balanced connection is always preferred because it enables better noise rejection, hum, buzz, electromagnetic interference, etc. However, for distances of up to 5 meters or 15 feet, you are generally going to be okay with an unbalanced connection. Try it. If it's fine, quiet, noise-free, you're good to go. Line or mic level. It's important to remember that all mixers operate at line level. That's why you have a gain control on the mixer, because you need to bring microphone level signals up to a place where the circuitry in the mixer can deal with those signals. So a line level connection is preferable to a mic level connection. This avoids having to attenuate and then re-amplify the signal at the other end, which can cause noise. Remember, you never want to use gain or amplification if you can avoid it. You've got a line level signal coming out of the first mixer, so if at all possible, try and bring it into the second mixer through a line level input. And the third question, stereo versus mono, will depend on whether you have stereo sources plugged into your submixer. Stereo sources always have 2 channels, a left and a right. If all the sources in your submixer are mono, there's no need to have a stereo connection. Now, for certain critical jobs where it's absolutely essential that nothing goes wrong, you may wish to run a second line as a form of insurance, basically a redundant connection. But it's important to understand that when you do that, you are effectively running two mono lines. It's not necessarily a stereo connection. The first situation we're going to look at is when the mixers are less than 5 meters or 15 feet apart. For example, they're next to each other at front of house. This would be common in situations where you are basically adding more channels to your main mixer using a submixer. In situations where the mixers are relatively close together, you can use an unbalanced connection because of the short distance. This keeps things relatively simple and it allows you to use standard guitar cables such as the ones that I have here. So the first step is to identify which output you're going to use on the sub-mixer. Remember, the sub-mixer is connected to the main mixer is connected to the back end of the PA system. Most mixing consoles have at least 2 sets of main outputs. Now on the Mackie here, you can see that it has a pair of XLR outputs on the back panel, but it also has an additional pair of main outputs on the front panel. And as you can see there, it indicates that these can be balanced or unbalanced depending on what type of connector you use. Most of the time you'll be using the main connectors. However, it's also possible to use an auxiliary output or a subgroup output, assuming that you can route the right mix of signals to these outputs. I can't tell you exactly which output to use because everybody's situation is different, but most of the time you'll be using either a duplicate of the main output, subgroup outputs, or an auxiliary output of some kind. Step 2 would be to identify which input you're going to use on the main mixer. Now here you have a number of different choices. Given that it's a line level signal, the most obvious choice would be to use the line level inputs on your mono channels. These have the advantage that they give you the most control over gain, EQ, as well as channel routings. So if you have 1 or 2 spare channels, that's your best option. Now let's say that this doesn't apply, you're completely full on your main mixer, and for one reason or another, you can't free up an actual input channel. Then you have to look for additional options. One possibility would be to use a stereo input channel. Now as you can see on this mixer, it has 2 what are called hybrid channels. In other words, it has 2 channels which have both a microphone as well as stereo inputs. These can be very handy for exactly this purpose. Again, if you're going to run a mono connection, you want to make sure that these channels are mono compatible, meaning that they say mono left. In certain cases, you won't see the word mono, and plugging anything into just the left connector will result in it being sent only to the left output of the main mixer, which is not good if you're going to run a mono connection. Another option is to return the signal into one of the effects returns. Now on this mixer, you have 2 effects returns, return 1 and return 2. The best way of thinking about these is line level channels which have no EQ and very limited routing options. But if all you need to do is send the signal to the main mix, these can be very useful. They're also useful in the sense that they are stereo, so it avoids tying up 2 channels. Now, if you are truly desperate, it is possible to connect a submixer to the tape input. This is not recommended for a number of reasons. First of all, these inputs normally have extremely limited routing options. Typically, you can send it to the left, right, and not much else. On this particular PV mixer, you can see that there is actually facility to route the tape to both of the monitor outputs, which is relatively unusual. The other issue is that the tape input is on RCA connectors, which gives you a further connection headache. So in a situation like this, it may actually be better to use an RCA cable and outfit one end of it with RCA to jack adapters. This is an example of such a cable. As you can see here, we have an RCA cable, which on one end has been fitted with RCA to TS adapters. This again is not recommended simply because RCA connectors are not very secure and they're notoriously prone to breakage. They're not considered professional spec connectors, unlike XLR and TRS jack connectors. So this should really be a last resort. So now that we've explored the various options that are open to us, let's make the connection. On the submixer, we will connect our guitar cables to the left output and the right output. Now when you do this for real, it's a very good idea to actually label the connectors so that you know which one is left and which one is right. Now on the main mixer, let's connect to the line level inputs of channels 1 and 2. So left to channel 1 and right to channel 2. Once we've done this, we have to set levels to ensure optimum signal to noise ratio between the two mixers. Now when you're doing this, it is really best to use a steady signal source, not music, not your voice, something like pink noise or 1 kilohertz or 440 hertz test tone. My personal preference is to use something like this. This is my Swiss Army 6-in-1 cable tester that, as you can see, also has a test tone function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable the test tone. As you can see there, light on means it is a 1K tone, and I'm going to connect this to the input of my submixer. We'll just leave that there. The second thing is you want to set the submixer such that the test tone is leaving the submixer at or around 0 on the main meters. So first thing is, make sure that my gain is correct here. You can see I'm at 0 on my PFL. So make sure the channel is unmuted, bring this up, and I want to make sure that I am at 0 on my meters there. This will present a 0 dB signal to my main mixer, and I can then set gain on my main mixer accordingly. So you can see that the signal levels have lit on my main mixer to indicate that it is receiving the signal. I then press PFL and adjust my gain accordingly. Now, you want it such that 0 on your submixer is also 0 on your main mixer. That way you know that the two will clip at the same time. This will give you the best signal to noise ratio. Obviously you want to do this for both channels just to ensure that you are at the same level there. And finally, seeing that we are running a stereo connection, we will make sure that you pan the left channel hard left and the right channel hard right. If you were running a mono signal, you would just use one channel and you would set that channel's pan knob to center. Now just to check, I'm going to raise the main faders to unity gain, and I'm going to bring up the faders on these two. Now when I reach 0 on my main mixer, you can see that my gain is good. So when I am at 0 on my sub mixer, I'll know that I'm also at 0 on my main mixer. This gives the best signal to noise ratio, and it allows the two mixers to work as effectively one big gain stage. Now let's demonstrate how to do this gain setting procedure when running into a stereo channel. As mentioned before, the PV mixer has two hybrid channels which can be used either as a mono or a stereo channel. So let's unplug from our mono channels and connect here. On this, because it is a stereo channel, we only have to set gain on a single knob. So similar to the other ones, we press PFL. On this mixer, you have a mic gain and a line gain. So you would set the line gain. Use my left hand so that you can see the meters. And once again, we are going for 0 here and 0 here. Just to double check, release PFL, raise the channel fader to unity, and interestingly enough, unity here is -9 here, and the reason for that is that the gain topology on this particular mixer does a little bit of subtraction from the signal when it sums the left and the right together. So in this case, you have a couple of options. You can either leave it like we did, or we can choose to raise the gain further such that when the channel fader is at unity, we actually get 0 here. So let's try raising that. And you can see there, we now have 0 dB on both. PFLing it, you can see we're at +6. Now the choice as to which of these settings to use is up to you. Personally, I tend to be conservative with setting my gain because I don't want to have to deal with distortion in the middle of a show. So I would tend to trust what the PFL is telling me over what the meters say with a fader at unity. So re-engaging PFL, I bring my gain down until it was at 0. Also remember that you have an additional 10 dB of gain available at the fader itself. So in my opinion, it's better to have your channel gain set slightly conservative than it be set too hot and risk clipping the channel during the show. Now for the sake of completeness, we'll demonstrate how to run into one of the effects returns. On this particular mixer, our effects returns are up here. We have return 1 and return 2, and the controls for those returns are down here. You can see you have return 1, send to monitor 1, 2, you have a pan and a level knob, and the same for return 2. So let's use effects return 1. Unplugging from the channels, plug in to our stereo return. Now when using a stereo return, you have no gain to set and you have no PFL. So the only way in which you can be certain that your levels are correct is to set the faders on the main mixer at 0 and then bring up the control here. As you can see, unity gain here is -3 on my meters. So I have a little bit less gain on my effects returns than I would on my channels with the gain set as we did. Now this is okay because you're within 3 dB of the meter reading on your sub mixer. If you were at 0 here and say for example at +10 here, you'd know that you'd need to trim your input back a little bit. This is again very important because you then know that your two mixers are calibrated to one another. Now let's look at a situation where our mixers are more than 5 meters or 15 feet apart. For example, sending audio between different rooms in the same building or even between different buildings. In this case, because of the distance, you have to use a balanced connection because this provides the best immunity from noise and also allows ground to be lifted to defeat ground loops. You'll need to use XLR cables, and you may also need to use adapters on one or both ends of the cables to ensure an appropriate connection. So as before, you identify an appropriate output on the submixer. In the case of our Mackie, we know that this second set of main outputs can be used as both a balanced as well as an unbalanced connection. The issue is that because it is a jack connection, you're not going to be able to use a normal XLR connector here, but you'll need to use an adapter to convert from TRS to XLR, a commercially manufactured adapter such as this one, or you can use an adapter cable, which is a TRS plug wired through a short length of mic cable to a male XLR connector. One way or another, you have to convert that into an appropriate connector for your use. It's worth noting that on some professional mixers like this Mackie, the main output level can be switched between line level, indicated by +4, and microphone level. This is an extremely valuable feature to have on any mixer which might be used as a submixer, because as you'll see later, it allows you to bring the main XLR output of this mixer into a microphone channel on the main board. Now let's make our connection. I have my XLR cables here, and I'm going to connect the main output of my Mackie to the PV. This time we'll be using the microphone level connectors here. First our left connector and then our right connector. I am pressing in the mic line level switch on behind such that the output of my Mackie is now microphone level. As before, we need to do our level setting procedure on both boards. So I still have my cable tester hooked up here, which is providing a 1K test tone. I want to ensure that I have a 0 dB signal going out of the submixer, which is then coming into the main mixer. Here I would press PFL and I would set my gain to give me about 0 dB. Now, I strongly recommend that you do not run a line level signal into the mic connectors like this. In order to show you why, I'm going to disengage the mic line setting on the back of the PV and show you what happens. So as you can see, we now have two clip lights which indicate that the channels are overloading, obviously because our gain was set for mic level and we now have a full-on line level coming in. So let's repeat our gain setting procedure. It's very clear that even with the gain all the way down, I'm still at +9 on my meters. And without a pad switch or some other way of attenuating the level, there is a very, very real chance that once the show begins, I'll end up clipping these two channels. So once again, I strongly recommend that you do not run a line level signal into a microphone input unless you have a pad switch or something similar. Instead, what you'll need to do is use an adapter like this. You can see that this is a female XLR to TRS adapter, which will allow you to connect to the line level input. And as you can see there, our channel is still PFL'd. We have a much more reasonable gain, and we can just adjust that up a little bit to give us pretty much the same gain as when we were using the unbalanced connection. So this is an example of having the right tools for the job and using the correct input for the correct level signal. Now, when connecting to a stereo channel, the procedure is pretty much the same as when you were using the unbalanced connectors. The only difference being that you're now using a TRS instead of a TS connection. One word of caution: make sure that the stereo channels on your particular mixer have balanced inputs. The way to detect a TRS jack is that there will always be 2 clicks when you insert a jack. So that is the first click. Notice that the connector is still clearing the top by about 1/4 of an inch. That's the second click. Once again, first click, second click. Now if I try that same thing on this stereo channel, note what happens. Nothing. Only 1 click. What that tells me is that these are actually unbalanced connectors, and connecting a TRS jack will have no effect whatsoever. We're still unbalanced. So these are the little things that you need to look out for when you're in the real world. Check your mixer manual. Determine whether the stereo channels have jack connectors that are balanced or unbalanced so that you can be prepared for this type of situation. So far in this video, we've covered how to connect 2 mixers together using both unbalanced as well as balanced connections. We've covered situations where the mixers are next to each other, as well as situations where the mixers are separated by more than 5 meters or 15 feet. The last thing we're going to discuss is what if you have noise issues? What if when you bring up the faders on your main mixer, you have hum, buzz, or other forms of interference? The usual reason or cause of this is a ground loop. In other words, a difference in the ground potential between your submixer and your main mixer. For a full explanation of this, have a look at my DI Boxes Part 1 video. The way to deal with ground loops is to lift the signal ground between the 2 mixers. And the best way to do this is with an isolation transformer, also known as a passive DI box. This will provide the galvanic isolation necessary in order to electrically isolate the 2 mixers from one another, and it usually solves the problem. These are so useful that very often professional setups will run through transformers as a matter of course, just as a form of insurance. So how will we set this up? If running mono, you would use a normal DI box such as this IMP2. If running stereo, you can use 2 mono DI boxes, or better still, a dedicated stereo DI box like this Radial Pro AV2, which as you can see has 2 inputs and 2 outputs containing 2 isolation transformers, which will help to reduce noise. This setup is a hybrid of the first and second ones that I showed you. We're going to be running line level out of this mixer and mic level into this mixer. So to begin with, I'm going to get my guitar cable and I'm going to plug it into the output of this mixer, and I'm going to connect that to my DI box. We then connect the output of the DI box to a microphone level channel on the mixer. Remember that running through the transformer results in what is called insertion loss. So typically you will be coming out of the DI at a mic level. This is useful if you need to run, for example, through a snake which contains other mic level signals. It helps to prevent crosstalk and other forms of signal contamination. So we connect to the DI box, and then on our main mixer we would connect to a microphone channel. How does this affect our levels? Our Swiss Army tester is still hooked up here, so let's once again, as you can see, we're running at 0 dBu out of our Mackie. Let's have a look at the level on our submixer, or rather on our main mixer. So with the gain all the way down, we're at -15, and there we are. My gain here is at 11 o'clock. So sort of intermediate between the two situations that we've looked at so far. This is one of the reasons why it's really important to carry spare DI boxes. Not only are they useful for running signals from the stage to your mixer, they're also very useful in situations such as this. If you were running a stereo connection, you just double up what I've demonstrated here. So that's all for this video. I hope that it's been useful to you. I hope that you understand how to connect two mixers together. Once again, if you have questions or comments, do please feel free to leave them in the comment section below the video, and I'm always happy to answer questions either here or on Facebook. Thanks very much for watching. This is Bruno Luce from GLB Productions, and I'll see you in the next video.